"You're not listed." That's what the woman at the admissions desk said to me. Not unkindly. Just matter of fact. Like she was reading a lunch order back. By the end of this story, you'll understand why those 3 words didn't just break my heart. They finally explained 11 years of my life. But let me take you back to where this all started. I met Richard Calloway in the fall of 2012. I was 31. He was 43. He had 2 kids from his first marriage, Tyler, who was 9, and Megan, who was 6. He had a mother named Ruth who'd just been diagnosed with early-stage dementia. And he had an ex-wife named Diana who he described, every single time her name came up, as amicable. I should have asked what that word meant to him. I didn't. We dated for 8 months. He was steady and quiet and a little reserved. He brought me yellow tulips from the grocery store on our 3-month anniversary. Not roses, not a big gesture, just those grocery store tulips, wrapped in that plastic sleeve they always come in. I thought it was the most honest thing anyone had ever given me. I thought quiet meant trustworthy. We got married in May of 2014. Small ceremony. Backyard of a friend's house. Tyler wore a clip-on tie and kept pulling at it. Megan held my hand during the vows without anyone asking her to. His mother, Ruth, sat in the front row in her blue dress and called me dear every time she looked at me. I thought, this is it. This is what I wanted. And in a lot of ways, it was. I loved those kids. I want to say that clearly. This is not a story about resenting them. Tyler and Megan were bright and funny and they needed someone in their corner, and I wanted to be that person. But wanting something and knowing what it's going to cost you, those aren't the same thing. 6 months after the wedding, I left my job at the accounting firm. Richard traveled for work 3 weeks out of every month. Someone had to be home. Someone had to drive Tyler to baseball practice on Wednesdays and make sure Megan got her allergy shots on Tuesday afternoons and keep the house running while Richard kept his career running. That someone was me. And I want to be honest, I chose it. I'm not pretending it was forced on me. I chose it because I believed we were building something together. I believed that what I gave, he saw. That first red flag appeared 11 months into our marriage. I went to schedule a dentist appointment and realized I had no active insurance. Richard had forgotten to add me to his health plan. He said it was an oversight. I told myself he was just disorganized. I moved on. That was the first time I talked myself out of something I should have talked myself into. It started with Ruth. By early 2016, her dementia had progressed past what she could manage on her own. Richard and I sat down and looked at memory care options. There was a facility called Meadowbrook off Route 9, clean, well-reviewed, a long wait list. $4,800 a month. Richard said we couldn't swing it. What he actually meant was, Carol will handle it. And I did. Ruth moved into our guest room in March of 2016. I was 35 years old with a guest room that suddenly had a hospital-grade mattress and a monitor on the nightstand. I learned her medication schedule, the Aricept with breakfast, the blood pressure pill with dinner, the sleep aid only on the nights she got agitated. I learned she slept better with the television on low. I learned that on her good days she thought I was her sister Margaret, and on her bad days she thought I was a stranger who'd wandered into her house. Richard was traveling more that year than any year before. I told myself, this is what love looks like when it's not dramatic. This is the real version. And then one afternoon in October, a Tuesday, I remember because I'd just gotten back from Megan's allergy appointment and the pharmacist had shorted us on the Flonase and I was already annoyed. I went to the filing cabinet in Richard's home office looking for Ruth's Medicare card. She needed a new neurologist. I found her folder. And right behind it, I found something I wasn't looking for. A manila folder labeled, Estate Planning, 2015. I almost put it back. The handwriting on the tab was Richard's, that narrow, slightly slanted print he does. I almost slid it right back into the drawer. I opened it. Inside was a beneficiary designation form for his life insurance policy. $450,000. The form had been filled out in 2015, 1 year after we got married. Primary beneficiaries, Tyler and Megan Calloway. Split equally. That made complete sense. Secondary beneficiary, the person who would receive everything if something happened to both children, was listed as Diana Calloway. His ex-wife. Not me. Not his wife of over a year. Diana. I stood there in that home office for a long time. Ruth was asleep down the hall. The house ticked and settled around me. I kept looking at her name like if I stared long enough it would rearrange itself into something explainable. I put the folder back exactly where I found it. I went to the kitchen and I made dinner. Baked chicken. Green beans. Tyler's favorite. I didn't say one word when Richard came home that Friday. I told myself there was a simple explanation. He forgot to update it. We'd been busy, we had a whole new life going. Paperwork slips. It happens. I was so good at that. Explaining things away. I'd been doing it since that first insurance oversight. But I should have said something that night. I should have set that folder down in front of him at that dinner table and waited. Instead I passed the green beans and asked about his trip. And that silence planted something in me that took years to grow. I brought it up 2 weeks later. I'd rehearsed it. I wasn't going to be emotional. I was just going to ask. I sat across from him after dinner and I said, when I was looking for Ruth's Medicare paperwork, I found the insurance documents. Your secondary beneficiary is Diana. He looked up from his phone. He said, yeah, I need to update that. That was the entire response. Yeah, I need to update that. The same tone he'd use if I reminded him to replace the furnace filter. I waited 3 months. Then 6. I was tracking it, I know how that sounds, but I was. In January of 2017 I went back to that filing cabinet and checked. The form was unchanged. Diana's name was still there. I brought it up again in February. He said work had been brutal. He'd been traveling 21 days in October alone, I know because I had a dentist appointment that month and I had to reschedule it 3 times because I couldn't leave Ruth alone. I counted the days he was gone the way I used to count down days to good things. He said he'd call the insurance company. He didn't. And so I started paying attention differently. The car I drove every day, registered in his name only. The house, purchased before we married, never updated to add me to the deed. His 401k, I caught a glimpse of a statement that came in the mail in a clear windowed envelope. Beneficiary listed as estate of Richard Calloway. Not his wife. Not Carol. Just the estate. My friend Linda had been my best friend since our sophomore year at Ohio State. She'd gone into family law. She came to visit in the spring of 2017, and we had lunch at the Italian place on Mayfair. I had the chicken marsala and I remember thinking how normal everything looked from the outside. I told her everything. The insurance form, the house, the 401k. I laid it all out. She put her fork down. She said, Carol. Do you have a will? A joint account? Anything legally in both your names? I thought about it carefully. We had one shared checking account. That was it. She said, I'm not trying to alarm you. But if something happened to Richard tomorrow, you would have almost no legal claim to anything in that house. And if something happened to you? He gets everything automatically. I told her she was reading too much into disorganization. She looked at me the way she has looked at me since 1999 when I'm lying to myself. She said, Carol, disorganized doesn't last 3 years. You've been married for 3 years. I drove home and made dinner and helped Megan with a history project and got Ruth settled for the night. I put Linda's words in the back of my mind and left them there. But that night I lay awake until almost 2 in the morning. And I started remembering small things I'd dismissed over the years. Richard still had a framed photo of Diana on the corner of his home office desk. He said it was there for the kids, so they could see their mom when they visited his office. Maybe that was true. But he had never once, in 3 years of marriage, framed a single photograph of me. Ruth passed away on January 9, 2019. She was 81 years old. The last 6 weeks of her life, I slept in the chair beside her bed more nights than not. I learned to sleep lightly, one ear always on her breathing. I talked to her even when she couldn't respond. I read to her from the large print Reader's Digest magazines she'd collected her whole life. I was holding her hand at 4:47 in the morning when she took her last breath. Richard was in Denver. He came home the next afternoon. I'd already called the funeral home by then. But about a week before she died, she had one of those rare clear days. You know how they describe it with dementia? A window. Her eyes were focused and bright, and she looked around the room like she was orienting herself for the first time in weeks. She looked at me. Really looked at me. She reached out and held my hand tight. She said, "You're a good woman, Carol. He should have told you that more." She slipped back into the fog within an hour. She was gone 7 days later. He should have told you that more. Not, he tells you all the time. Not, I'm sure he knows. She said should have. Past tense. Like she'd been watching for years. Waiting for something she never saw him do. After the funeral, I expected something to open up in Richard. Grief does that sometimes. I thought losing her might crack him a little, might make him want to talk. About us. About the future. About what we were to each other. He went back to work on the 4th day. I spent the next month sorting through Ruth's belongings. Donating her clothes and grocery bags. Settling her small estate. I found her jewelry in a shoebox in the back of her closet, modest pieces, a cameo brooch, a pearl bracelet, a thin gold chain. There was a handwritten note tucked inside, shaky but legible, for Carol. I brought it to Richard. Showed him the note. He nodded. He said, "That's nice." And that was all. 3 weeks after the funeral, I was clearing space in Richard's filing cabinet for Ruth's estate documents. At the very back of the bottom drawer, slipped behind a folder of old car insurance records, I found an envelope. Sealed. White business envelope. Richard's handwriting on the front. Diana's name. I held it for a long moment. The postmark was from 2018. While I was sleeping in the chair beside his mother's bed, while I was managing her medications and calling her doctors and keeping this family running, he had written Diana a letter. I didn't open it. I want to be clear about that. I'm not the person who opens other people's mail. But I held it. And I felt the weight of it. I put it back where I found it. That night I went to bed at 8 o'clock and I stared at the ceiling of the bedroom I'd shared with this man for almost 5 years. I thought, whose life am I living? Because it wasn't mine. I had poured every year of my 30s into this house, this family, this man. I had given up a career. I had given up the version of myself that had ambitions and a desk and a paycheck with her own name on it. And I was still standing outside the window of this family, looking in. I almost asked him about the letter that night. I almost packed a bag and drove to Linda's. But I stayed. Because staying was what I did. Staying was the whole architecture of who I'd become. And I still hadn't understood what that staying was truly costing me. The call came on a Thursday afternoon. February 14th. I will never stop finding that cruel. Richard's assistant, a young woman named Priya, called me from his cell phone. She said he'd collapsed at the office. She said they were taking him to Memorial. She said, I thought you should know. I thought you should know. Not, we called you first. Not, you're listed as his emergency contact. She called me like she was doing me a courtesy. I drove to Memorial Hospital in 11 minutes. I went straight to the admissions desk. I gave my name. I said my husband had been brought in, Richard Calloway. The woman typed something. She looked at her screen. She looked at it a moment too long. She said, Are you on his emergency contact list? I said, I'm his wife. She typed again. Another pause. She said, I'm sorry, ma'am. The contact on file is a Diana Calloway. She's listed as next of kin. She'll be the one we contact for medical decisions. I didn't understand at first. I made her repeat it. She said, Diana Calloway is listed as next of kin. And I stood there at that desk, in the waiting room of Memorial Hospital, on Valentine's Day, and every single piece of it fell on me at once. The insurance form with her name. The house deed without mine. The 401k. The photo on his desk. The sealed letter postmarked 2018. Ruth's words, he should have told you that more. Every single thing I'd explained away or put in a drawer or promised myself meant nothing, it all landed at the same moment. I wasn't the person he kept forgetting to update. I was the person he had never replaced her with. I had cooked 11 years of dinners in that kitchen. I had driven those children to school and practice and appointments and college visits. I had bathed his mother and read to her and held her hand while she left this world. And in every document that carried legal weight, in every place where the law asked Richard Calloway to name his person, he had written her name. I found one of those plastic waiting room chairs and I sat down in it. I didn't cry. I was past crying. I just sat there in that waiting room, very still, and for the first time in 11 years I stopped explaining things away. And I understood something that was almost harder than the betrayal itself. He never lied to me. Not technically. He never told me I was his person. He just let me act like I was. And I let him let me. Richard was released 2 days later. Mild cardiac event. Medication. Lifestyle changes. Follow-up in 6 weeks. The doctor used the word lucky. I drove him home. I made soup. I set his medication out on the counter in the little Monday through Sunday organizer I'd already bought and filled. I did everything I always did. And then I sat down across from him at the kitchen table. He looked at me. He knew from my face this wasn't about dinner. I said, at the hospital. When I got there. The woman at the admissions desk told me Diana was listed as your next of kin. He was quiet. He said, Carol. I said, I need you to let me finish. He stopped. I said, I have been your wife for 11 years. I raised your children. I took care of your mother every single day for 3 years until she died in our guest room. I have never once asked you to choose between me and anyone else. All I ever needed was for you to see me. That's it. That's all I was asking for. He was looking at the table. I said, why is her name still there, Richard? After everything. Why is it still her name? He was quiet for so long I thought he wasn't going to answer. He pulled at the sleeve of his shirt, that thing he does when he's uncomfortable, pulling at the cuff. Then he said something I didn't expect. His voice was low. Almost ashamed. He said, I didn't know how to let go of the idea of what I thought my life was supposed to be. I looked at him. He said, Diana and we didn't end the way things are supposed to end. There were circumstances. And I think I kept her name on those forms because changing it felt like admitting something I wasn't ready to admit. I said, admitting what? He said, that the life I'd planned was actually over. I sat with that for a long time. The soup was getting cold on the stove. I could hear the refrigerator hum. I said, Richard. We got married. We built a home together. Your mother called me her daughter. Tyler and Megan, I was there for everything. Their first days of school. Graduation. Tyler's first car accident at 17, do you remember who he called? Not you. Me. What did you think all of that was, if it wasn't real? He didn't answer. He looked like a man who had been asked a question he'd spent 11 years avoiding. And that silence, that quiet, exhausted, slightly relieved silence, was worse than anything he could have said out loud. My phone was on the table between us. It buzzed, Linda. She'd been checking on me every day since the hospital. I let it go to voicemail. She left a message I've never deleted. I still listen to it sometimes, usually late at night when I need someone to say the thing I can't say to myself. She said, Carol, I know you. You're sitting in that house right now managing everything and telling yourself you're fine. But I need you to hear me. Everything you gave that family was real. What you did was real. That part was never the question. The question is whether he ever gave you anything close to the same in return. She paused for a second. Then she said, you deserve to be someone's first call, Carol. Not an afterthought on a form. I sat in that kitchen long after Richard went to bed. The house was quiet in that particular way it gets late at night, the kind of quiet that used to feel like peace and now just felt like absence. I looked at all of it. The photo of Megan at her graduation on the wall. Tyler's baseball trophy on the shelf he'd had since he was 12. The kitchen where I had made 10,000 meals. The chair where Ruth used to sit in the mornings with her tea. All of it was real. Every bit of what I gave was real. But I wasn't in his paperwork. And somehow, knowing that, all those real things felt like they'd happened to a woman I used to know. I didn't leave that night. I want to be honest about that, I stayed. I made breakfast the next morning. I called the cardiologist to schedule the follow-up appointment. I refilled the prescription at the pharmacy on Birchwood because the one closer to us was out of stock. I did all the things I always did. But something had shifted in me that wasn't going to shift back. Over the next few weeks I started making quiet changes of my own. I opened a personal checking account at the credit union on 5th, the one Richard didn't use. I called an attorney. Not Linda, someone more removed, a woman named Diane, which is a name I found darkly funny given the circumstances. Diane sat across from me with a legal pad and asked me to walk her through our financial situation. I did. She looked at me after a while and said, Did you and your husband ever sit down and talk about what would happen to you financially? In case of death, divorce, incapacitation? I thought about it carefully. Genuinely tried to remember a single conversation like that. Richard and I had talked about everything that needed managing. The kids' college funds. Ruth's care plan. The roof replacement we kept putting off. His job when his company went through a restructure in 2018. We had talked about everything that needed handling. We had never once talked about me. Not once in 11 years had he sat across from me and said, "What do you need? What are we making sure you have? What happens to you if I'm gone?" He managed me the same way he managed the house and the car and the kids' schedules. He trusted that I would be handled because I always handled myself. Because I never asked him not to. And that's the real thing. The thing underneath the thing. It wasn't cruelty. I've turned it over for a long time, and I genuinely don't believe it was. I don't think Richard woke up each morning and decided to keep me invisible. I think he just never fully arrived in our life together. Part of him was always still standing in the ruins of the marriage he'd lost. And so he put me in the role I was good at, the one who kept everything running, and he never once had to ask himself whether I was okay, because I always was. He never had to worry about me. Because I never let him see that there was anything to worry about. And I let that go on for 11 years because somewhere deep down I believed that if I just gave enough, cooked enough, cared enough, stayed enough, he would eventually turn around and see me standing there. He never did. Not in the way that counted. Not with his name next to mine on a single piece of paper that mattered. Some people will take everything you are willing to give, and never once think to ask what you need in return. That isn't love. That's just convenience, dressed up carefully enough that it can last 11 years before you finally see it for what it was.